Tenju Nyeming Labande Gyatso
My name is
Sigayu.
Palden Gyatso. My country has been invaded by the Chinese Communist government. Now there are no human rights there at all. I'm from this country, Tibet. The situation is like this. The Chinese government tried to attack the Dalai Lama in 1959. On the 10th of March 1959, the communist authorities invited the Dalai Lama to the military barracks in Lhasa. They said that the Dalai Lama was not allowed to bring any bodyguards, any security. And it was during this situation that all the Tibetans were very worried for the safety of the Dalai Lama. At this time, I was living in Lhasa, and many of us went down to protest and to try to secure the safety of the Dalai Lama. Many of us gathered there in peaceful protest, and we said the Chinese government had no right to be in Tibet. And we said that Tibet belongs to Tibetans. So peacefully we demonstrated and protested. Because of this peaceful protest, I was imprisoned in 1959 by the Chinese authorities. How many years did I spend in prison? I can say that I was imprisoned for 33 years in total. The only reason I could get out of prison after 33 years is not because the Chinese government released me. The reason why I could get out of prison was because many NGOs, human rights organizations, had been working on my behalf since 1983. Thanks to the work of these human rights organizations, I was released in 1992. During the 33 years in prison, I suffered many hardships at the hands of the Chinese government. There were many forms of torture. I remember in 1961 to 1963, prisoners were dying of starvation. Out of all the prisoners, I would say 70% died because they didn't have enough food to eat. We also had to work very hard during our time in prison. We were treated like animals. We had to do work like animals. We also had quotas that we had to fulfill during our work. And if we didn't fulfill these quotas, we would be tortured. And it wasn't just beatings that we had to endure. I have another example of torture. And that is the use of electric batons for torture. For example, being stripped naked and electric kettle prods being used all over the body. And even worse, for the male prisoners, they would use electric batons in your mouth and torture you. I used to travel and give talks carrying these torture weapons, these electric kettle prods. But now it's become more difficult to travel carrying these. But I'm showing in the photos these instruments. in prison, in Drapchi prison in Lhasa, I was tortured with electric cattle prods in my mouth. And that's why in my mouth I have no teeth left. All of the teeth in my mouth are false teeth. False teeth. In 1990, I lost all my teeth in prison. In 1992, I was able to travel abroad. And in 1995, when I was in England, Amnesty International paid for my dental treatment, and I was able to receive these dentures. So you can see in the older photos on the screen, you can see when I first arrived abroad, I was much thinner. My health was in a very bad condition, and I didn't have teeth because of torture. So look, this is the kind of torture and suffering that prisoners have to undergo. And why do I have to undergo this kind of torture? I'm not a special, dangerous person. I'm a Buddhist monk, and I used to live in the monastery practicing Buddhist practice. But this is Chinese policy, Chinese government, with no regard to human rights. And they treat even a simple person, ordinary people, monks, like this. And also, the electric batons were used on Buddhist nuns, and they were raped with these electric batons. We're not lying about our treatment. This is the truth. This is simply telling you how prisoners are treated in Tibet by the Chinese government. And it's not just Tibetans who are treated this way. The Chinese government also treats other prisoners, Falun Gong practitioners. All of these kinds of people are imprisoned and tortured. And this is still going on today. For example, in 2007, there were 2 nuns who had been in Drapchi prison for 13 years and 8 years. And they escaped to India, and they had been tortured with these electric batons. So it's not something that was just in the past. This kind of thing is still happening today. The Chinese government always say that they respect human rights in Tibet, and that after 50 years everything is going well in Tibet and Tibetans are happy. They send delegations all over the world advertising the wonderful condition that Tibetans live in. I recently met a delegation like this in London, and they were talking about how Tibetans were liberated and after 50 years of democratic reform were flourishing. But I said to them, if this is the case, if Tibetans are really so happy, then why are Tibetans still protesting, still taking to the street? This is now 2009. After 50 years, people are still rising up. Why? If you think about a dog who's been captured, if they're really suffering, if they feel like there's nothing more they can do, then of course they will fight back. This is how the Tibetans were rising up out of desperation, and then they were treated with such brutality. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has often said, we're not seeking independence, we're seeking genuine autonomy. This is what he's been saying for many, many years, that we will live, that Tibetans will live under China. And delegations have been sent, representatives of the Dalai Lama have been sent to China, but they're being ignored, they're not being listened to. Even after all these years, we're saying that we will live together, we will accept Chinese rule. And still the Chinese government are acting in a brutal way, oppressing Tibetans. They think that if they can kill Tibetans, get rid of Tibetans, get rid of all Tibetans, then they think the problem will be solved. All the people who have protested have demonstrated peacefully against the Chinese government. They don't want to live under China. People are saying, what we're saying is we want our freedom, we want our human rights, we want to be respected as Tibetans. I think that if this is the freedom, if this is the desire of Tibetans for freedom, then our struggle will continue. I think that it won't be possible to regain our freedom through violent means. I don't think that we will be able to win our freedom using violence. I myself have always protested peacefully. So I think it's very important to stick to non-violent means. I have much more that I could say, but it's all in my written testimony, which is distributed at the conference. But I still want to give a few more details. People often say to me, there's no hope left for Tibet, but I don't agree. I think there is hope. It's been 50 years. It's been over 50 years, but it could still take 100 years, 200 more years. The Jewish people, for example, have lived a long, long time without a homeland. I think that there are lots of people in the world who are living without a homeland, but I think we'll be able to regain our homeland. We can sustain the struggle for many years to come because we have truth and justice on our side. And we have the support of many friends all over the world, NGOs, Tibet support groups, Amnesty International, human rights groups. I think we also need to reach out to the Chinese people themselves, because the Tibetan struggle is not aimed against Chinese people. It's only aimed against the Chinese communist government, not against the people. We have sympathy for the Chinese people. We're actually the same. We're suffering in the same way, with no freedom at all underneath this government. I know the real situation. I spent so long in prison. I think that the reason why we often don't know what Chinese people are thinking is because there is no space at all to express themselves. And one example of this is the Sichuan earthquake of last year, because you remember so many people died, especially school children, where the school buildings were collapsing. The government buildings didn't collapse, and so many children died with the one-child policy in China. Many families lost their only child in the earthquake. It's very sad. And then 1 year later, they came out onto the streets to commemorate the loss of their children, but they weren't allowed to. We all saw this on the news, on TV footage, how the parents were being arrested and being prevented from commemorating the deaths of their children. Many governments are forced to deal with China with the strong economic ties today. But I think in the long term, this is not a viable way to deal with China, because human rights and the fundamental freedoms of people needs to be addressed. And I can't say that all Chinese people are bad people. I remember when I was in prison, there were Chinese guards, people I didn't know, but I was at the point of death because of torture. But I remember a Chinese guard was one who helped me, and I recovered because of this one Chinese guard. I've written an autobiography of my experiences, and all the details of my prison experiences are in this autobiography. So Tibetans have been saying for a long time that going down the path of peace and non-violence, we want our freedom. The Chinese government has been trying to silence Tibetan voices for all this time. If the Dalai Lama travels to Western countries, the Chinese government always tries to prevent other countries, other heads of state from meeting with him. Even recently in South Africa, the Dalai Lama was denied a visa because of Chinese pressure. However, there was a change in leadership, and now South Africa has extended their welcome to the Dalai Lama. So, from this example, we can see how the Chinese government behaves, how they try to silence Tibetan voices. I've written in my book the 33 years, all about my experience of 33 years in prison. But I don't feel hatred towards the Chinese. I don't feel like I want to seek revenge on them. I'm still alive. I didn't die. I've written all about this in my book. I don't feel angry at all towards the Chinese. I really want to make this very clear, because even though I'm a novice in terms of Buddhist studies, Buddhist practice, but even from the basic principles of Buddhism, I know about the principle of compassion. So I think that there's no point in feeling angry or hatred towards the Chinese government for the way they treated me. And I cannot respond to negative actions with my own negative actions. This will not be of benefit to anybody. This will only lead to more negative actions. It'll lead to disagreements, fighting. This is the same in a lot of situations in life where negativity only breeds more negativity. Even in relationships between countries, it's necessary to forgive and to try to proceed in a positive, constructive way. Otherwise, this leads to bigger disagreements, wars, violence, fighting. So we have to overcome this kind of thinking. This is just my point of view, my experience, the way I think, just from basic Buddhist principles. It's not something that I'm just saying. I really feel that it's important not to feel hatred, not to feel anger. And after 33 years of suffering, 33 years in prison, that's something that I've been able to learn, and I've been able to practice my religion in this way. So I need to be able to think in a much broader way, even though I was only a Buddhist monk for 10 years and then in prison for much, much longer than that. And I don't have any other ways of knowing more about religion the time that I was in prison. But all the time I was in prison and I was being tortured, I tried to have peace of mind and develop inner peace. There were other people in prison, the ones who didn't survive. They were the ones who got very, very stressed, who had feelings of hatred, revenge. It's all about the way that you feel inside and the way that you manage your emotions. So one important experience I had in the 33 years of prison was trying to think about the reasons why I was there, think about how I was striving for peace in the world and justice in the world and for the truth. So everybody here has come from all over the world. Everyone here is concerned with human rights, wants to improve the situation in the world. I want to thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to all the testimonies and for the work you do. We are here for human rights all over the world, and we need to work together to improve the situation of human rights in the world. And I'm hopeful, very confident that we can change things for the better, improve the situation. Now the Chinese government is not listening at all to Tibetans, and it seems that there's very little that Tibetans can do that will make China listen to them. So that's why all our hopes are pinned on the international community, on the support of the international community. We need people like you to continue your work, and we need organizations, international human rights organizations, to continue their work. Now all of you, when you go home after the conference, you'll be able to go home back to your own countries. Now where am I supposed to go after the conference? I'm living in exile in India. I'm very grateful to India for being able to live there, and I'm very grateful for India for hosting many, many Tibetans who are settled there, who have to live there as refugees in exile. But the truth is that we don't have anywhere to go. We don't have a home to go to. So please work for Tibet so that we all can go home. Thank you very much.